Back in the day, or they still say today, that people had a bunch of kids because there was farming and stuff and they needed all the help on the farm. When in actuality, you hear about people having a bunch of kids, but they don't say how many lived. See, the mortality rate was a lot higher back. I mean, I think there's a high mortality rate now. They're starting to come back. For it could, I don't know what the reason, but anyway, back then, people look back without education or without knowledge, and just repeat what somebody else has said, and maybe confuse it with something else. And so a lot of people had a lot of kids, or they were shown that, when you look back in dates in history, oh, they had 8 kids. Well, maybe only 3 survived. They had 8 kids, but 3 survived. 5 of them died before the age of 1 or 2 or whatever, cholera or whatever. And the people that first came here to the U.S., when they started farming, they couldn't sustain a large family. So there was a lot of, in fact, there was not a lot of women. Basically there was a lot of rough work, and women didn't, single women just didn't come to this country and just, think, well, I'm going to go out and build a house. They came here to be wives and stuff. Well, a lot of them came here. They were hired. They were like house. What do they call those? They'd work for a certain amount of time. I can't remember what it's called. It's like you get experience. Anyway, that's how this country was formed. Is in the beginning was people would come here. A lady would come here and say she'd be a housemaid for some rich guy, and well, he ended up getting her pregnant and not marry her, and so she'd have a couple kids, and then some guy on a farm maybe needing some kids to help. Whatever reason they did, but that's how women were getting married. They'd come here thinking they was going to get married, but they'd be a maid servant. What do they call them? Described servants, or what? Not described. Anyway, they'd work for a certain amount of time, like not necessarily. I don't know if it'd be I don't know. You couldn't do anything. You'd be like a slave to somebody for a certain amount of time. I can't remember the name of it. So the women could come here, and then farmers would, their oldest kid, maybe they'd be turned 14, 16 years old, and they couldn't feed them any longer. So they'd hire them out to some rich guy'd pay them, and they'd teach them a trade. They'd be a servant. I can't remember what the name of it. I'm thinking described servant. I can't remember what the name is. Anyway, so they're young people, young kids would be hired out or sold or whatever to other people that would need them in a trade. Say if they was whatever it was, they didn't have kids, they didn't have whatever, and so to get help, they'd hire these kids, and then they'd train them, and they'd raise them for a certain amount of years. But they'd be doing work. They'd be hired as workers. And then those kids would go out after they grew up. I don't know how many years it took them to be a servant. And then they go out and do whatever trade, And that's how this country was formed. Now, what brought this up? Oh, overpopulation. Everybody thinking that, well, we can still have a bunch of kids nowadays. And nowadays, everybody survives, or most of them, unless it mother's nuts or whatever, father, she kills her kids in a bathtub or whatever. So they think, well, they used to have a bunch of kids that died. So you think back, you gotta relate to the reality of the situation.